Okay, guys. Right, let's get started. Apologies for the late start. I'm having one of those days today. Looking at the graduates. Failed them all, sorry. Okay, for the last few weeks, we've kind of turned the corner, if you like, in these kind of set of lectures. We've gone from looking at the kind of overall background and the motivations for incorporating sustainability into projects. And we started to turn towards looking at these tools and approaches, which is one of the things I wanted you to do in your assessments, to try to evaluate if there are any methods that we could use to try to lever sustainability in to our projects. And we're going to continue on with that today. So last week we looked a little bit at project initiation, so what we could do at the very start of a project before we've even really progressed with it, how we may kind of structure our thinking a little bit, I guess. And today we're going to touch a little bit on sustainable project planning. So once we've decided that, okay, yeah, this project is the best thing to do, we're going to go with it, we're signed up to it, we've got our business case maybe, we've got the buy-in of our management, we've started to pick our team, how do we then go forward and plan it? And so we'll just maybe give you a few kind of my thoughts on that, which you can then look into in more detail. Okay, so the things we're going to look at, we're going to just touch a little bit on work breakdown structure, that's Gantt charts to most of you. How maybe we can use those and how maybe we can lever some sustainability into those. We'll talk a bit about risk identification and risk management. I see sustainability in projects, a lot of it is as a pure risk management exercise, trying to reduce the risk of any environmental issues happening or trying to reduce the threats of legislation. Resource planning, how do we plan, what kind of resources do we need to plan for in a changing world? And a little bit about some environmental management tools that can be used at an early stage. Okay. So the work breakdown structure, what's going on with this? Give me a second. Work breakdown structure. Good. Yeah, the stock in trade of your project manager, yeah? Gantt charts, breaking down the work, project scheduling, how, what's that saying? What's the best way to eat an elephant? Well, to break it down into chunks. What's the best way to do your essay, your thesis, break it down into chunks? So project planning. So the success of the project depends on the effort and the care and the skill you put in at this stage. In most projects, the planning is, I would argue, the most important phase of your project, okay? Because it's where you set out absolutely every action, everything that you're going to be doing in the future. And you can't go back and re-plan, okay? So planning should be where you put probably your most focus at the start. It's vital that your preparation is planned in the developmental stages to address any problems that may arise further on. So typical work breakdown structures. It's basically a tool to define and group a project's work elements into a way which helps organise the total scope of the project. So breaking a project down into work packages, I guess. So if this was your thesis, for instance, you'd be breaking it down into chapters or research versus literature versus conclusions. But it's important that we do such, yeah? We break them down into smaller projects, a process which we usually refer to as this work breakdown structure. And we can use various different tools to do this. This is just a simple tree. Breaking projects down into manageable projects helps ensure that they're all undertaken carefully, which is important in the overall success of the project. So this particular one here is to build a data warehouse and point of sale system. So a bit of an IT project there. So breaking it down into what we need to do first. Well, we need to initiate the project, assigning the people, preparing the plan. We need to get all the required documents together, analysing our resource requirements, peer reviewing our work, preparing our development plan, analysis and design. We need to build our software product, we need to test it, and we need to deploy that service. So yeah, goes without saying, we need to break down our project into various different chunks. And again, one of the most common ones you'll see is the Gantt chart, of course. All you guys have spent hours on MS Office or whatever it is, preparing these detailed Gantt charts. Just something quickly to say on Gantt charts, make sure you can read the bloody things. I get sick of having project reports come to me and they've got Gantt charts at the back that are so detailed you can't read them because they're so small, they're so tiny on a bit of paper. I once had one that was 6 A3 sheets put together. And it went across the whole top of the office like that, and I was like, well, that's not much good, is it? We can't read that, you can't look at it. You can't look at it, it should be giving you an overview of what's happening. They're not supposed to be these big kind of things, they're supposed to give you a very quick overview of dependencies and interdependencies between projects. Anyway, the Gantt chart's a good tool for discussing and spreading information and get a general feel of how time-consuming a project will be from start to finish and how long each element of the project will actually be. It also helps when you're planning and organising the work, when you're making schedules, resource plans and budget planning. So you know at this stage here, which maybe if that's deployment, you need to have your key staff employed from that period of time. You need to make sure you've got enough money to pay them that period of time, etc., etc. So breaking it down is the most way you should do it. You can do this a number of ways, using Microsoft Project, for instance, and other kind of newer collaborative tools, or you can just do it using Excel, which is my preferred tool. Okay, so work breakdown structures, you've probably done stuff on that already. Very useful. From a sustainability point of view, it's just a case of trying to ensure that you've planned for any sustainability outcomes that you want at this stage. It's got to go into your work breakdown structure, okay? It's got to be part of your Gantt chart. It's got to be a dependency. If it's not on there, no one's going to do it, okay? You might say, well, we've got all these aspirations, we've got somebody in place to do it, but you need to plan it in. Very simple. So for each activity in the structure, there's a record that identifies and interrelates objectives regarding the deliverables and the contribution, the delivery, budget, how many days you're going to need on that particular project. And using this work breakdown approach, we can gain a picture overall of the links between these activities, okay? And we can track the progress of an activity and manage the risks. Fantastic tool for communicating with people responsibility and coming up with objectives in relation to accomplishments. A good tool for assessing performance. This one here is actually a sustainability kind of related document. This one's it's about cleaning a river population, and they've worked it out in terms of what economic feasibility we need to do, what environmental, what social aspects need to come to this project, how that links in with your sustainable development strategy, how that links to the structure and the regulations that you're working with, and how that links to the outcomes of the actual organisation. So what I'm saying here is when you're planning sustainability into a project, you have to have it in your general workflow. You have to have it broken down into each element. You have to have responsibilities assigned. You have to have it joined up with the rest of the work plan. And it sounds like a no-brainer, but this, again, isn't common. It's just not common. We plan for all the important things. You know, we plan for things like when we do procurement, when we do the delivery, when we actually do design stage A, design stage B, etc., etc. But we don't explicitly plan for where these environmental considerations come in. And it's essential that we do so. Risk management. Okay, at the planning stage, as I've said, sustainability is all about good risk management. It's very simple. And we need to understand what those risks are. So a good definition of risk is a combination of constraint and uncertainty. Hopefully you've done that with Claudia. It can be a positive and it can be a negative. And we need to understand how they work. So we've all got constraints on our projects. We all have uncertainties. And some would say that's our job. Our job as project managers is to manage uncertainty. So we can minimise the risk in the project by eliminating the constraints, probably impossible, or by finding and reducing uncertainty. The other thing that's interesting is risk management is an ongoing process. It's not a one-off. And again, I've worked on projects where we've said, like, week 3, we're going to do a risk management plan. And that was it. There was nothing else. We did a risk register, and it was a static document. Risk management is ongoing. It should be done every day, daily, weekly, hourly. It should be a constant construct, a constant idea. So risk identification assigns action priorities to activities with respect to risk, identifies high-risk factors, and identifies how you deal with the situation. So you're not just identifying the risk, you're identifying the solution to the risk. Very important in project management, although again it's often overlooked. And you've got to identify as many risks as possible and be prepared if something happens. And so I guess again what I'm arguing for is not reinventing the wheel here, just using the common risk management processes to identify environmental risks, social risks, and not economic risks. It's just a change in mindset. It's just thinking and trying to incorporate these what are often seen as externalities into the project. So some of the kind of common things in risk management: time and cost estimates are too optimistic. Usually time, we think we're going to do better than we are. Customer review and feedback's too slow. Unexpected budget cuts. Got to try and plan for that. Unexpected budget cuts is one of the biggest barriers to sustainable development in projects, in my view. Again, we haven't planned contingency. What happens if that particular government or that particular organisation withdraws some money from the project? That's fine, we'll just engineer out the sustainability things because they're the add-on anyway. So what we're trying to do by planning for it is trying to reduce this thought that sustainability is an add-on. It's not, it's an integral part of the whole project. Unclear roles and responsibilities. Who's responsible for sustainability in our project? Is it you, the project manager? Is it somebody you work for? Is nobody responsible? Is it responsible, is the client that's responsible? Is it the stakeholders? Understanding who that is, that's a huge risk. Stakeholder input's not sought. Communication. Stakeholders changing their requirements after the project started. You guys who work in construction will be very used to that. The client tells you what they want, and then a few weeks later they decide they don't want to build and they want something else instead. You've got to try and plan for that. Stakeholders adding new requirements after the project started, poor communication, lack of resource and commitment. You can plan, and you should plan for all of these risks and contingencies. So again, this is taking our former work breakdown structure, which was looking at this kind of river project I was talking about, and trying to identify what stages in the project plan are particular risks more likely to happen: high risks, low risks, medium risks. So we can track risks using a risk log or a risk register. Each risk we identify, we write it down, and we say what will we do in the event of that risk happening, who's responsible for it, and how we'll go forward with that. We review this risk log on a regular basis, adding new risks as they occur, and when they're ignored, they don't go away, of course. So the risk management chart must be prepared during the strategic planning of the project. It codes all the internal and external risks depending on its the likelihood of that risk happening. So again, sustainable project management, just make sure you plan for the environmental risks. One useful approach is to use that kind of shading code for the level of risk associated with your work breakdown structure. High risk, you need to deal with it now. Growing risk, you need to think about it. Low risk, don't worry about it. Activity does not begin yet. Each block is identified according to the risk factors observed when tackling the project. And of course, we all know the danger of poor risk management. And again, I always use this example because it's a very well-known example now of an environmental problem, an environmental risk. So BP received permission, this is the interesting thing, to exempt the project from requirement for environmental review. So usually when you do a big project such as this, you need an environmental impact assessment. BP argued that they didn't need one for what they were doing because the risk was low. I don't know how you can argue that the risk of drilling oil is low, but it was, and so they didn't do it. When they did have their risk assessment, so they didn't plan for any risk to happen. When they did have a risk assessment, they identified the worst case scenario, which was a blowout which might produce 2,500 barrels of oil per day. Actually, the blowout occurred a lot more than that, so it was over. They underestimated the worst case, if you like. There was also no response plan, so on their risk register they said, okay, there's a risk of a blowout, but there was no plan for what would actually happen if that risk took place. And there was no equipment that it needed in order to deal with that. So all of the literature that's come out since that was done, all the academic and also industry literature, is saying this was just a pure failure of risk management. BP basically saw the environmental risk as being negligible. All of the risks that they identified were risks to their production capacity. Okay? So they saw their internal risks. What if we have this problem? We'll have less production capacity, which will impact on our operations, impact on our economic strength. They didn't incorporate the external risks, which were the environmental risks in this case. And that's what's cost them the money, the billions of pounds over the past few years. So the RIGS spill response plan, including a web link for a contractor that directed users to an Asian shopping site instead. So their risk plan was so useless that even their links didn't work in their document. So it had been checked. So good risk management is essential in the planning stage for sustainable development. Okay, resource planning. What kind of resources do we need to plan for, and how do we manage that from a sustainable development point of view? Well, we have at least three major aspects in all resource planning: people, equipment, and costs. We're very good at thinking about equipment. Okay, what materials do we need, what kit do we need. We're also quite good at thinking about costs. When do we need to have that particular amount of money for that particular action? We're not so good at planning for people resource. But people are a resource as much as anything else. So we need the people required to do the work, we need the equipment required to support the people the project needs, and we need the cost of that people and equipment. There's a direct connection between these resources and the quality and the sustainability of the project. If we don't have any of these in the correct amount, quality and sustainability is going to suffer every time. So in order to ensure that sustainability is considered throughout the project, the people at work must have an understanding of the green principles. It's no good trying to run a sustainable project or trying to build sustainability into your project if people don't have the skills to be able to deal with that. You can't impose it on people, okay? This means that all contributors to the project must be aware of the drivers for incorporating sustainability and the implications of not considering it, okay? So your team needs to understand why you are doing the actions that you are doing. Very simple. Where possible, you'd like to have team members who have some experience in this area. You'd like to have team members who can already understand and buy into your ethos. But in practice, that rarely happens, especially if you don't have control over the recruitment of your team. And again, it's a dream of every project manager to be able to pick their own team. It doesn't likely happen. So you have to be prepared at the planning stage to think about how you're going to build a staff base which can deal with the issues that you're trying to deal with. So it's not necessary. So in that case, it would be necessary to provide some training, even on the basic level, to ensure that team members understand the fundamentals of sustainability. We're going to touch on that a bit in the seminar. Talk about trying to build this culture of sustainability into your project team, so everybody's on the same page. Everybody knows where they're dealing with. Everybody's bought in to your project goals. And take a step back. This a good example of this, which I think we might look at as a case study at one point, was again the Olympics. I keep returning to the Olympics. Main reason is it's one of the biggest projects ever held. Well, I was going to say in the UK, but across the world. The Olympics are big projects involving many disciplines, many people, not just construction. And one of the things they did in the London UK Olympics was they had a special sustainability talk for every contractor. So in the UK or in Europe, we have this thing called toolbox talks, some you might have heard of. We have this big culture of safety within the UK. Okay, trying to create workspaces that are very safe for people to come and work on, trying not to have workers killed in the construction industry. We've got a good record on that. And one of the reasons is we have this thing called a toolbox talk. So you come into a particular project, start to build, and you have a talk on health and safety. This is how health and safety works on this site. This is what we're trying to achieve. You cannot come onto site unless you wear a helmet and you've got boots. That kind of thing is very common again. What they did in the Olympics is they had a toolbox talk for sustainability. One of the key things they wanted to do, of course, was to provide the most sustainable games ever. That was their kind of one of their reasons that they won the contract in the first place. And so they had a sustainability talk. So every single person that came onto site had to sit through the talk that told them why sustainability was important for the Olympics, how they were going to deal with it, and what their responsibility was. So you could walk around the Olympics site, I'm told, and grab any member of staff, anybody at the time, from cleaners to IT people to contractors, and they'd all say, oh yeah, we're trying to be the most sustainable Olympics, we're doing it by doing this. They were fully bought in and clued up. And we've started to adopt that. Some big companies, Skanska, another construction company, who do this regularly now, and a lot of other companies do. We've started to adopt this in the UK a bit more. So trying to build an awareness of why you're trying to achieve something on your project. But of course this affects your timeline and costs, so staff training becomes a planning consideration. So if we go right back again to your work breakdown structure, you're thinking, okay, we're going to try and get a culture of sustainability amongst our team. You've got a plan to have that training. You've got to plan when it is, you've got to plan where it's happening, you've got to plan if you're going to get an external training, you're going to do it yourself, how much it's going to cost. So we need to start thinking about these sustainability issues right at the very early stage. Another option, of course, is to work with a sustainability consultant to come in during the project. Impact on costs as well, and must be considered in the work breakdown structure. So you need to think about all of these tiny little issues to plan them right all the way back, otherwise they won't happen. So project team culture, we're going to talk a bit more about that. You need to think about the influence on culture, and by culture we mean the way that the team kind of thinks as a group, okay, on the project. regardless of any corporate culture that you have within an organisation, the projects take place almost in isolation, as we've said. Okay? Not necessarily ideal, but they do. So you, as a project manager, are responsible for setting that culture within your team. So if you're trying to build a sustainability-focused project team, you need to think about how you build that culture of sustainability. We understand how we build culture quite well at the moment. This Kluckhoff in the 50s, he told us that culture is comprised of a couple of things. It's of acquired, transmitted shared values and beliefs and behavioural patterns that distinguish one group of people from the next. So culture is kind of learned. We can try to influence you in terms of culture. I'm trying to influence you now, talking about sustainable development in projects, trying to build that awareness into you, to build that culture amongst this group of people, that you all know when you come into this room, yeah, this is all about sustainability, yeah, okay, we're all going to get bought into this, trying to build that culture up. But it's also learned as well, okay, kind of like, just by the day-to-day actions of the people around you, you can develop culture. So there is a culture within this group of people working to get their MSc at Northumbria University. And that's not something that we've taught you, it's just a group of people coming together and the experiences you have of building this culture. So culture has aspects which are visible and some which are hidden. Values and feelings are hidden, but it's a manifesto of those values alongside habitual behaviour that are observable. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in the seminars, about how you build that culture. And of course, culture doesn't have to just be about sustainability, it can be about quality. A culture of a team that's high performing, a culture of a team that always delivers on time, a culture of a team that has fun, a culture of a team that works hard. You can build that as much as you like. So when considering creating a culture of sustainability, we need to think about these observable entities. So this is the onion model of culture developed by Kahalili, okay, and Hofstadter. It describes the culture from the deepest part of the onion. So these are our values, okay. So when we talked a bit before about setting a mission and values of a project, having those values kind of written in from the early stage into every document you read, in your business plan, in your work breakdown structure, in the whole team, having those values built in, people start to learn those and they start to observe those, and then they start to build that into a ritual, into a habit, and then those habits start to inform their practices. So the project manager can create a culture of sustainability by showing leadership in its direction, and fostering innovative can-do attitude. So I've often said I don't believe that project manager is the right word. I don't think you guys should be project managers. I think you should be project leaders, okay? Because we talked, a few people have said it in the past, projects is all about people, okay? It's not about technical stuff. Management day to day is kind of the day-to-day technical thing, managing people, managing budgets, managing our actions. But you need to be able to lead. If you want people to follow you and to do what you want them to do, you have to inspire leadership, okay? And part of what we can do there is create this culture by being a leader. So unfortunately, if you want to build a culture of sustainability, you need to exhibit it yourself, okay? So no driving to work in your 4x4 and saying to your team, come on guys, we're going to reduce carbon on this, we're going to cut all your transport, you can all get the bikes, and I'm going to go and drive off in my 4x4. Okay, you've got to try and exhibit that culture. That's an extreme example. But you've got to exhibit that. You've got to be in with your team. You've got to show them that you're going through the pain as well. Okay, we'll talk more about that in the seminar. Resource planning. Project resources. Okay, so we have other resources that we need, not just people. We need material, we need services, we need equipment. We need to think about how we procure that. So project procurement. Okay. So do we have any kind of standards that make sure that all of the material, all the structures that we use are sustainable, are ethical, come from decent sources that are renewable, that are not harming to the environment? So we need to think about that at the early stage of the project, because we need to plan for that. It's going to have cost implications, it's going to have work breakdown implications, it's going to have staff implications. So, example, the project team can decide as a team. We talked about what constitutes a sustainable project, and we said, well, perhaps some actions aren't particularly sustainable, but there's nothing we can do. We've got to drill oil. It's not seen as a sustainable thing to do. However, we can run our project in our operations in a sustainable manner. So we can decide, okay, we're only going to use recycled paper, for instance, or we're only going to use iPads, or we're going to get rid of using paper. We can decide how we set that up, and that then builds your culture as well. There's lots of alternative sustainable products that we can use. We can buy, computers that are recyclable, seen as more sustainable, office furniture that comes from sustainable sources, all these kind of things. And these can be identified through things like eco-labelling and FSC timber. Increasingly, suppliers are communicating sustainability of their products through their marketing. So do you remember, I think I said that when Apple released their new MacBooks a couple of weeks ago, they make great pains at the end of each kind of section to show the environmental credentials of our computers. So we can try to say we'll only use sustainable products in our actual development on a day-to-day basis. In some cases, the cost of purchasing these products may be a little bit more. So we need to plan for that in our breakdown structure, in our budget planning. But sometimes we can try to offset that by the benefits we might get from our corporate social responsibility, from our external facing communications. So we might say, okay, it's going to cost us a bit more to use these resources that are more sustainable. But as Ray Anderson said in that video a few weeks back, being sustainable is the best marketing tool we've got, so we can reduce our marketing budget accordingly. But we can only do that if we think about it at the planning stage. So sustainability can be built into the whole procurement process, defining the need, evaluating options, designing, specifying, tender evaluation, contract management, supply development. And quite often now, if you're working for a company that goes to tender for a project or tender for a particular service, you'll have something called like pre-qualification questions, PQQs. You'll have a little form to fill in that says, tell us about your company to make sure that you meet with our organisational norms. And quite often now they'll ask you questions such as, do you have a sustainable procurement policy? And so things like that. So you have to start thinking about that now. So the key is to consider these issues at the very early stage in the process. For instance, if you decide I'm going to only have paper with 100% recycled fibre for tissue paper, for toilet paper, I guess. Then at the award stage, the best value for money option that meets the specification will be awarded the contract. In this example, tissue paper below 100% recycled will be rejected. So yeah, so what this is basically saying, if you've got in your early stage that we're only going to use 100% recycled material in our procurement options, when you come to look at your procurement, you won't just go for the cheapest option because you'll say, well, that's the cheapest one, but it doesn't meet our requirements, doesn't have 100% recycled. So you'll only go with the particular one that you set out. So you're setting your intentions out for resources at the very early stage. Supply chain management. When we did carbon footprinting, we talked about your secondary footprint, which was the footprint you get from your clothes, your food, the computers, all of the equipment that we use. Supply chain management is a bit like that. So our project itself, our operations, will have a carbon footprint, but the supply chain of everything we use will also have a carbon footprint too. So it's a business issue affecting an organisation's supply chain or logistic network in terms of environmental risk and waste costs. Sustainability in the supply chain now is seen as essential to delivering long-term profitability. The reason is a lot of big organisations have started to get their house in order. They can now manage, people like Marks & Spencer's is a good example. They've managed to get their operations into order so that what they actually affect on a day-to-day basis is very sustainable, it's very good, it has great CSR policies. So now they're starting to say, well, we've done everything we can, but we can directly impact. How can we impact on our supply chain? How can we now make sure that everybody we work with has the same ethos as we have? But again, by setting these intentions out at a very early stage, you can ensure that your sustainability, supply chain management actually happens, is actually good, actually works the way you want it to. And costs. So in most projects, cost will be a major factor in influencing the factor in an organisation as whether or not to undertake a project. So as you said very early on, at first glance, cost of a project has sustainability and often seems more in terms of capital costs, but in reality the sustainability projects can offer greater financial returns in the mid to long term. So in order to try to communicate that, we need to quantify the costs and benefits at every single stage in the project, okay? It's no good just saying to your CEO, yeah, it's going to cost more, but we're going to get benefits at the end. You have to demonstrate that. And one way to do that is to identify the full range of impacts in sustainability in the planning and decision-making process. Because once you've seen these impacts, you can start to analyse how much they're going to cost using some costing systems. So we're not going to go into too much detail with these because it's finance, and I don't like finance. and I guess a lot of you guys probably don't either. But there are some systems out there for you to investigate. Stuff like ABC accounting, okay? It differs from traditional cost accounting, which assumes that producing products and services cause costs, and it assumes the opposite round. It assumes that the activities performed for products and services cause costs. So the actual production of a product doesn't cost anything, it's the activities performed where the cost is. So it assigns costs to activities in the project such as labour, employee training, regulatory compliance, and attributes these costs to products, services, and other project outputs on a cause and effective basis. So it looks at things like external social costs borne by society. It looks at things like contingency costs, things like risk costs. So full cost accounting, so trying to make sure that we look at every single aspect, every hidden part of cost as well. So for instance, if BP had done their full kind of ABC cost accounting and their risk management plan right, they would have had the environmental costs of that barrel of oil in that particular project. I'm not explaining that very well, I'm not very good at finance. ABC cost accounting. So it's similar to whole life costing, okay? We're not just saying this is how much this iPad costs, we're saying how much kind of the impact of that cost as well, from an environmental point of view. So such management requires the accumulation of social and environmental costs and tracing these into activities that create them. Carefully considering social and environmental costs that produce totals that are 4 or 5 times above the estimated amounts. So for example, social and environmental costs in manufacturing are often hidden in permits, okay? Fines for water treatment costs, energy, waste disposal for instance. So sometimes we think the cost of that particular manufacturing is just the raw material, the labour, and maybe the energy. But there are also costs in there, the costs of buying permits to emit carbon emissions, the cost of buying permits to discharge to water, the cost of permits to reduce the environmental energy and waste disposal costs. So what we're trying to do is just make sure that we account for those costs within the overall product. Once we've done that, the product may look less economically viable and it may make a more sustainable option look more viable. So by attributing the environmental costs of the activities, the project team can identify alternatives that lower these costs and increase productivity. For example, using different materials, your capital cost is higher, but the environmental benefits are greater, such as less waste or does not produce pollution. So on first glance, that particular material will be more expensive and you'll say, no, we're not going to use it. But once you factor in that you're going to have less waste, which is less cost, and you're going to have less pollution, which is particularly less cost in permits, then actually it becomes cheaper. So just by factoring in every single kind of decision, I guess. Very similar to whole life costing, which is something that we're starting to use more in construction. There is a requirement in all government buildings that we use whole life costing. I've worked on quite a few projects, government projects that haven't. It's one thing having these targets, another thing actually implementing them. So life cycle costing is a bit of an extension to life cycle analysis and life cycle assessment. Life cycle assessment at times to minimise the environmental impact of products by identifying the impacts at every stage. Life cycle costing identifies the internal and external costs associated with the product process throughout every stage of its life. So life cycle cost has been defined as the annual cost of a project, including capital and disposal, discounted over the lifetime of the product. A very simple example then. If you're kind of procuring on a least cost benefit, you're going to buy some batteries here, a 4-pack of batteries for your MP3 player or whatever. You're going to look at this, you're going to look at the purchase cost in pounds. And you're going to say, okay, we're going to buy the one that gives us the best performance for the cheapest amount of money. So the total cost of this particular one here is £2.5 for a pack of 4. That looks quite good. Okay, well maybe we'll buy these zinc chloride ones. £1.5 for a pack of 4. Great. These ones here, £6.5. We're not going to buy those, they're far too expensive. But when you start factoring in other things like battery life, the number of packs you need for 1,000 hours of patcher, the purchase cost overall, the recharging unit as well for these particular ones here, the energy you need to recharge that, how much you need to dispose of that, the total cost becomes very different. So even though these ones look like they're the cheapest overall, £1.5 per unit, once you've factored in how many packets you will need to make it work, you factored in the disposal cost, your total cost is £264. When you look at the most expensive ones capitally, and you factor in other costs such as recharging unit, energy to recharge, disposal, they become the cheapest. So I'm just saying, when you buy something, it's not always a capital cost which is the most important. You need to try to factor in the whole life cycle idea. And finally, full cost accounting, very similar to ABC accounting. It enables the incorporation of a broader set of external costs as well as future costs into the decision-making processes. So it allocates the usual costs, such as the capital, hidden costs, such as overheads, such as regulatory, health and safety, environmental management systems costs, liability costs, what happens if there's a risk, less tangible costs, such as goodwill from a project. Okay? Can you factor the amount of money you're going to make from goodwill back into your project? And sustainability-focused costs. So costs that will be incurred if a sustainability focus was approached into an organisation's performance. I'll put the documents where I've taken these from up on Blackboard for you. They come from the accounting professional body, the ACA. So these are well-known accountancy costs. These are ways of making sustainability options look more attractive because we're just incorporating the entire costs. We're not hiding the costs at the end of the day. I have an example of what's going on here. Okay, and finally, some other tools for you, some environmental management tools. So one of the outputs of developing the project could be producing an environmental management system, which is an EMS system. This focuses on the implementation of programs on waste management, water efficiency. It's a plan to help you develop sustainability throughout your project or operation. To also demonstrate your commitment to the environment whilst improving operational efficiency and reducing costs. They can be informal, they can be formal, they can be they're usually voluntary, so you don't have to have one. But environmental management systems are more and more used in projects and organisations at the moment. The most famous one is ISO 14001, Environmental Management System. It's an international standard, a bit like ISO 9001, which is a similar standard for quality management, okay? Which is one that most people are aware of. Basically, it's an environmental standard which makes you look at your entire operation, your entire project, and identify where particular environmental impacts may occur, and set targets for yourself to beat them. Okay? Most large companies now have an ISO 14001 plan. It's almost a requirement of doing business to have an ISO 14001 policy. This university has one in development. It's not quite there yet because they're complex systems. And we're a bit behind the times at this university. That's another matter. So environmental management systems, you can apply these at a project level as well as a organisational level. Similar one is EMAS, which is a European version. It's used in the European Commission only, whereas ISO 14001 could be used globally. Participating organisations must implement their management system, commit to continual improvement, and report publicly on an annual basis. So basically what you're doing in your project, you're saying, this is where we're going to go with sustainability, these are environmental impacts, this is how we're going to improve them, this is what we do on a day-to-day basis, and then you report that. The Tyne Tunnel in the northeast up here was completed a couple of years ago. We had a second tunnel put under the Tyne to go next to the one that was existing that was built in the 50s or 60s, I think it was, 60s, 67. They had an EMAS system when they built this during this project, and it was held up as being one of the best ones that had ever been done before. Very, very clear on what they were doing on the project from an environmental point of view. Everything from community engagement, things like replacing windows in houses that were next door to the construction site, so to reduce noise coming from the construction site to help people's health and well-being. The aim is to recognise and reward organisations that go beyond legal compliance, continuously improve their performance. So it's a good way of formalising your plan, a good way of demonstrating your commitment. Okay, so hopefully that's just an introduction to some ideas of what you can do at the planning stage, some tools and approaches you can use at the planning stage in order to try to lever sustainable development into your project. And in the seminars we're going to talk a bit more about how you can try to create this culture of sustainability, to turn your project team into a load of tree-hugging hippies that are going to produce what you want them to at the end of the day from a sustainable point of view. Okay, thanks guys. Thank you.
You can try.
Yeah, I think Corpus didn't. Yeah, I mean, I know that, so whatever you want to
I guess we have to... You ready?